Hi, Katzcradul here. It's finally tomato time at my house, and boy are we glad. We wait every year for this time of year for the first tomatoes to come in. And while we're getting enough to eat every day, we're also now getting a little bit of an excess. Too many to eat in one day. So I have to do something with them because I don't want any of them to go to waste. Not really enough to get the pressure canner out and start making tomato soup or that kind of thing, but just enough to where it's too many to eat. So I'm going to show you what I'm doing today. These are beautiful cherry tomatoes, and I've got a big batch of them, and I washed them and cut tiny little slits with a paring knife in the bottom, just about, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch thick. It doesn't have to be very much, because what I'm going to do, here they're all done in my pan. I'm going to start a small pot of boiling water, and I'm going to blanch these tomatoes. And what I want to have happen is for that boiling water to get up under the skin and push it off. So here I've got my pot and my tomatoes are in it. You can see the slits have opened up a little wider. And what I'm looking for when I put them in the pot of boiling water, and it doesn't even really have to return to a full boil, what I'm looking for is for the skins to begin to look wrinkled. After a little while, just a little over maybe a minute, minute and a half, sometimes 2 minutes if your tomatoes are just really fresh and maybe they're not quite as ripe as they should be. It may take about 2 minutes for them to look like the skins are getting wrinkled. But when they are, then you take the pot off of the stove and scoop, using a slotted spoon, scoop the tomatoes into a pan of ice water. And here you can see they've returned to the vibrant red, and the ice is just floating on top of the water. The tomatoes aren't really cooked, just that you've just softened the skins. And what I'm wanting to do with the ice water is, 1, to stop the cooking action, and 2, to make them cool enough for me to be able to handle. Here you can see the skin just slips right off of the tomato. Prepper A and I had a lot of fun sitting at the table and doing this. The skins are in the bowl to the right. We're going to give that to the chickens. And then the beautiful peeled tomatoes are to the left. Now, wouldn't those be gorgeous canned just like that? Putting them all in a jar, sealing them up, and processing in a boiling water bath. But today I'm going to make salsa. Here in the blender I have just a few of the tomatoes and some of the juice at the bottom, and about 3 jalapenos. Last year my jalapenos just produced like crazy, so I had lots of them in the freezer. I cut them in half and seeded them and froze them just like that. So I put about 3 jalapenos, 6 halves, in the blender with a little bit of the tomatoes and blend it up. And it gets real pale looking and very frothy. It's because of all the air that's incorporated. And then I go ahead and add the rest of my tomatoes and just pulse them. I don't want them to be too blended up, because I want them to look like this, where you see bits of the tomatoes in the salsa. I still want it a little chunky. The bubbles on the top are just foam, and when it settles down it looks pretty much like this. You can see a little bit of white up there in the top right hand corner. That's still a little bit of the foam, and as this ages over the next couple of days it will take on a darker color. So in the bowl I just have the jalapeno peppers and the tomatoes. Now I'm going to add onions and garlic from my garden. I'll put that whole onion in there and I'll dice it pretty fine, and probably about half of that garlic, maybe a little better. Yeah, here's how much garlic. We love it. It's very fresh, very difficult to peel when it's that fresh. We just smash it like the chefs do with the chef's knife. And here is Prepper A trying her skills. She's the only one who watches TV in the house, and the only thing she really watches is cooking shows. And she loves minced and Pepin, I can't think of his name, Jacques Pepin, and they were on together the other day, and she just thought that was the best thing in the whole world. But she's really gotten pretty good at mincing garlic and using that chef's knife, putting one hand on the point as a pivot point and then just swinging the handle around to dice it up pretty fine. This is about the amount of onion and garlic we put in the salsa. I could have put that in the blender and made it very fine and made it almost like a taco sauce, but I want this to be salsa, and I want to taste the chunkiness of the onion and the little bits of garlic, so I like the body that adds to it. I'm going to add 3 things next. Salt, and you do need a generous amount of salt with fresh tomatoes, some fresh cracked pepper, and some ground cumin. The cumin is what makes it taste like Mexican food. I just love that. After I tasted it, after I added those three, it didn't have quite enough zing for me. Sometimes they've developed these tomatoes to where they're almost a little too sweet and don't have enough acid. So I put just a splash of red wine vinegar in there to bring the acidity up just a little bit. You can see how it looks now chunky. Lots of people would take the seeds out, and I could do that with a tomato meal. I could get the seeds and the skins out at the same time, but I like the seeds. They're little and tiny, and I leave them in. Today, the tomatoes I picked made 2 pints of salsa plus a little extra, almost a little half pint there. I'm going to make King Ranch chicken tonight, so I'll just use what's in the little jar tonight, and I'll put the rest in the refrigerator, and it'll preserve those tomatoes for about 2 weeks in my refrigerator. Now, these are not processed in any way whatsoever. This is fresh salsa. I label it as such with today's date so that when I see the jars, I'll know exactly how old they are. And like I said, this way it will last about 2 weeks in the refrigerator. So if you're getting more tomatoes than you can eat in a day's time, but yet you don't have enough to bring out the big old pressure canner and start canning them, try salsa. It is delicious fresh, and it's so easy to make. If you wanted to puree your tomatoes pretty fine in the blender, you wouldn't even have to peel them at all, and you could eliminate that step. In fact, when I make homemade salsa to can, because it is, I do heat processes a little bit. I make it hot, and then I put it in hot jars, and then I put it in a boiling water bath. And even when I make my tomato soup, I do not peel my tomatoes. I blend them up in the blender, and it's very easy like that. But for fresh salsa like this, where it's not being cooked at all, I just like it better without the skins. Sometimes they can be just a little bit tough. Anyway, I hope you'll try this. It's so easy. I would have used fresh jalapenos out of my garden, except my jalapenos aren't quite ready yet. And if yours aren't ready, but your tomatoes are, pick up a couple of jalapenos at the grocery store, or maybe even have some canned. Anyway, this was all made with food from my garden, except for the spice, the dry spices, salt, pepper, comino, and a little bit of the red wine vinegar. So I hope you try it. Let me know. Cat's Cradle.